Good evening. This is Professor Rush once again with part 3 in our series on Christianity. In this presentation, I want to reveal how Jesus, the experience, the mythic hero who advocated seeking knowledge, understanding self, personal responsibility, and human decency, was converted into a living, breathing human being, and his message perverted for political and economic reasons, becoming what today is known as the Catholic Church and Christianity. Now, as explained in a previous presentation, John Allegro discovered the identity of Jesus in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the teacher of righteousness, also known as the Anemita Muscaria, or holy mushroom, a Messiah who was going to show up in the future. Now, the group responsible for the Dead Sea Scrolls were the Essenes, but the message from our mythic hero Jesus does not simply come from that particular tradition. It is a composite coming from ancient Egypt, more than likely Buddhism, and ideals in play at this particular time period, which would be about 2,000 years ago in an area of the Middle East known as Palestine. The Essenes, an apocalyptic group, thought the world was coming to an end. They had, for the most part, withdrawn from the world around 200 BC and were waiting for the end of days. They were a very strict sect, believing that one had to conform to the rules or the promised land, heaven, would not be forthcoming. The Essenes, again, were a doom and gloom group, but in all such groups there will be individuals with another agenda, or perhaps tired of all the restrictions. Sometime between 10 BC and 10 CE, a person emerges by the name of John the Baptist, who may or may not have been a real person. He comes out of the wilderness, symbolic of the repressive nature of the Essenes, realizing that knowledge, understanding self, personal responsibility, and human decency would go a long way in terms of righting the wrongs perpetuated by the Jews and the Romans. The Baptist, or someone like him, began to offer communion with the teacher of righteousness, Jesus, but only to those who could answer a riddle, as did Oedipus. You recall the Oedipus story where a monster was guarding the gates of Thebes, and travelers who could answer the riddle gained passage into the city. Those who could not were eaten by the monster. The riddle was, what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening? The answer, of course, is man. Oedipus answers the riddle, and he liberates the city. Now, the riddles the Baptist offered are called parables, and those who could understand them and feed their meaning back to the leader were eligible to commune with the teacher of righteousness, that is Jesus, or the holy mushroom. Now, it must be understood that in the area of Palestine there were numerous cults or breakaway groups from the various Jewish sects. There were also Gnostics and Manichaeans and other small groups, many of which operated in a similar manner. Not all were welcome into these groups. I have a long discussion of these groups in the Mushroom and Christian Art and refer the listener to that work for the details. These were small groups, perhaps 40 or 50 members, and as long as they remained invisible, they were no threat to the Roman authorities. Moreover, when the leader of these small groups died, the group usually fell apart because of lack of trained leadership. That is, no one to know the proper ritual procedure or where to obtain and prepare the holy mushroom and so on. Some groups reformed around a member who became a leader, but if inadequately trained, communion with Jesus could lead to acting out and people drawing attention to themselves. These are the groups persecuted by the Romans. Other groups, Jesus or Christ cults, or even groups led by apostate Egyptian priests, had properly trained individuals to take over when the leader died or left the scene. These were the early bishops, who by 150 of the current era had an established organization with standard ritual procedure, people trained or in training, individuals trained in collecting and preparing mind-altering substances, standard meeting places, and methods of economically supporting the bishop and his or her assistants. By this time period, that is 100 to 150 of the current era, not all members were entertained with a parable, nor did all members commune with the teacher of righteousness. This was the provenience of the bishop. Again, refer to the Mushroom and Christian Art for the details. Out of these various groups emerged three separate philosophies as to the nature of Jesus or Christ. There were those groups closest to the original who thought Jesus was simply an experience, while other groups thought Jesus to be a real person who in the past walked the landscape doing magical things. Then there were the groups who thought Jesus part human and part God, a Messiah who would one day return and set the world right. The word Messiah, by the way, comes from the ancient Egyptian Mishi, a reference to crocodile fat, probably mixed with Egyptian henbane, and poured over the pharaoh when crowned king. The psychoactive ingredient in henbane is scopolamine, a potent hallucinogen. The Messiah is the anointed one who has met God. Now, as you can see, there was no standard conception as to who or what Jesus was, only various philosophies. But many of these groups were organizing and causing trouble for the Romans, who were dealing with the various tribes, pushing into Roman territory, and, of course, trouble at home with a populace right for rebellion against the oppressive nature of the Roman rule. Members of some of these groups had actually become part of the ruling elite. Time goes by, with various groups persecuted, although the level of persecution is more than likely an exaggeration invented by the Catholic Church to indicate how pervasive the Jesus or Christ cults were. Our time period is around 312 of the current era, when King Constantine, a thug by any standard, made contact with some of the groups and made them an offer they couldn't refuse. He simply told them that they were to either join him and stop all the harassment, or he would kill them all, and he surely would have. It appears that one of the most important individuals initially contacted by Constantine was Eusebius of Caesarea, who, probably at the point of a sword, was told to organize and join the politic and get special tax exemptions, or die, or perhaps even worse. Undoubtedly, the group Eusebius belonged to believed Jesus to be a real person, and for this to work, Jesus had to be located in history as a real person who did magical things. From 312 to about 325 of the current era and the Council of Nicaea, Eusebius went from group to group, confiscating books as a path to developing a standard storyline, and trying to locate the real Jesus, but evidence for the real Jesus could not be found. The Roman or Jewish historians were silent on the matter, which is very strange for a person who did magical things and had such a large following. There was absolutely nothing that would stand as proof that Jesus ever existed as a living, breathing human being. To reveal that Jesus was an experience and not a real person would jeopardize their connection to the politic and place the movement into the same category as the Celtic stories and the gods of the surrounding pagan tribes. It is at this point that Eusebius and others forged Jesus into history. The purpose was not the betterment of humankind, but pure and simple politics, that is, money and power. The central message of our mythic hero Jesus, that is, seek knowledge, know thyself, take responsibility for thought and actions, and human decency, was perverted into what we know today as the Catholic Church and Christianity. In the fourth part of this series, I will discuss the construction of the New Testament and reveal the development of the Gospels and the creation of a number of personalities, for example, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Peter, and Paul, all non-persons, shamelessly invented by the founding fathers of the Catholic Church, and likewise forged into history. You'll be surprised, perhaps shocked, when you learn the origin of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, as well as Mother Mary, St. Peter, and St. Paul. Don't miss it.